Andrew Griggs told police his wife had walked out on him and their 3 sons. He knew that was a lie for 23 years. In the seaside town of Deal, on the coast of Kent, they'd looked like a photograph you'd frame. A fisherman husband. A wife who ran their freezer shop with him 6 days a week and came home each night to 3 little boys, 6, 4, and 18 months old, with a 4th already on the way. But that perfect family was staged over a lie no one in Deal could see. And on the 5th of May 1999, the wife in that photograph vanished from her own home, while the man beside her in every family portrait knew exactly where she was. He knew it while he packed up that life and moved to a new house, in a new county, nearly 200 miles away. He knew it while that new house was built up around her. What you're about to hear isn't a death that stayed buried literally for over 2 decades, hidden beneath concrete, beneath silence, beneath a story a family told itself because the truth was unbearable. And stay until the end, because there's a detail almost no one knows. Long after the verdict, long after the world believed this story was finished, the man at the center of it tried to rewrite it one more time, using someone who loved her most to do it. So ask yourself this: if the person who helped bury the truth without ever knowing it, what does that make him? A victim of the lie. Or part of it. Nothing about the Griggs family looked like the opening chapter of a murder case. That's what makes what happened in March 1999 matter so much. Deal sits on the Kent coast, a few miles up the shingle from Dover, a fishing town in the old sense of the word, where boats still came in with the tide, and everyone on the high street knew whose boat was whose. Andrew Griggs was one of those fishermen. He and Debbie had married in 1990, and together they ran Griggs Freezer Center on South Street, a small shop selling frozen goods to a town that had known them both for years. Debbie split her days between that shop and their home on Cross Road, raising 3 sons 6 years old, 4, and 18 months, while carrying a 4th. A family growing the way families do in small English towns, unremarkably, 1 birthday and 1 school term at a time. No neighbor, no customer, no one who worked the counter beside them ever suspected there was anything to look for. For 9 years, that was the whole story. A working couple, 3 boys, a shop front on South Street. Then, in early 1999, 1 number in a bank ledger changed, and nobody in Deal noticed. On the 2nd of March, weeks before Debbie disappeared, Andrew Griggs went to the bank and moved their joint business account into his name alone. No explanation survives for why. No argument was reported to anyone who might have glanced at the paperwork. It looked like a fisherman handling routine business, nothing more. It would be years before anyone looked at that single, quiet transaction and understood what it actually was. Not an oversight, not housekeeping. A man closing a door before he needed to walk through it. 4 months pregnant with her 4th child, Debbie Griggs had no reason to believe anything was wrong. The shop was open 6 days a week. Her sons were growing. Her husband was, as far as she knew, exactly who he'd always been. She had a little over 2 months left to live. On the evening of the 5th of May, 1999, sometime between 7:38 p.m. and 11:20 p.m., investigators would later determine Debbie Griggs was killed inside her own home on Cross Road. There was no note. No sign of a struggle anyone else would ever see. In the early hours of the next morning, neighbors watched her white Peugeot 309 reverse off the drive at 2 a.m., then pull away again at 4 a.m., someone moving a dead woman's car in the dark, hours after she'd already stopped breathing. No phone call came to her sister, her mother, or anyone else who might have expected to hear from a woman 4 months pregnant with her 4th child. She was simply gone, and for the better part of a day, only one person in Deal knew she wasn't coming back: her husband. Andrew Griggs did not call Kent Police that day. He waited. It was not until the following afternoon, nearly 24 hours after Debbie was killed, that he picked up the phone and reported her missing. When officers asked him what had happened, his answer was simple, almost clinical. Debbie had been struggling since the birth of their youngest son. She was suffering from postpartum depression. She had walked out. It was an explanation built to close the question, not open it. A woman overwhelmed, leaving on her own. No crime, no suspect, just a wife who needed space. But a story like that only survives if nothing contradicts it, and within days something did. Her car was found abandoned just over a mile from the family home. Not hidden, not driven far. Left, as if whoever had been behind the wheel had nowhere further to take it, or no further need to. Inside that car, investigators found blood. Debbie's blood 5 months from a due date she would never reach. A woman who had supposedly walked out under her own power does not usually leave her blood behind in the vehicle she vanished from. That single fact took the case from a missing person report to something else entirely, though. In 1999, something else was still a word investigators were reluctant to say out loud. There was no body. There was no witness. There was no confession. There was a young mother, gone without a trace, and a husband's story that no longer matched the evidence sitting in the impound. 2 questions took root here, and neither one would be answered for 20 years. Why did Andrew Griggs wait a full day to report his pregnant wife, missing a day in which anything could have been done, and instead, apparently, nothing was? And if she truly left this world inside that car, on foot, or by force, where did she go afterward? Because blood tells you something happened. Blood does not tell you where a body ends up. Kent Police opened a murder inquiry. Andrew Griggs became almost immediately the only person anyone seriously suspected. But suspicion in 1999 was not the same thing as proof, and the case that should have ended with an arrest was about to stall for nearly 2 decades, built on evidence that pointed at one man and still, somehow, wasn't enough to convict him. By the time Kent Police formally opened a murder inquiry, they weren't starting from nothing. They had blood recovered from an abandoned car. They had a husband who'd waited a full day to report his pregnant wife missing. And they had a story, postpartum depression, a woman who simply walked out that was already falling apart under its own weight. Detectives worked backward from that car. Forensic examiners confirmed the blood inside it was Debbie's. House-to-house interviews up and down Deal turned up neighbors, customers, and friends who all described the same version of the marriage: ordinary, unremarkable, nothing that explained a disappearance. So investigators turned to the one place that often tells the truth a marriage won't: the money. That's where the second thread emerged. Weeks before Debbie vanished, Andrew had quietly moved their shared business account into his name alone. And as detectives dug further, they uncovered something else. Andrew Griggs had been carrying on a sexual relationship with a 15-year-old girl. Debbie had found out. She was not willing to stay quiet about it. Suddenly, investigators weren't just looking at a missing woman. They were looking at a man who stood to lose his marriage, his business, and his reputation all at once, and who had rearranged his finances days before his wife disappeared. To detectives working the case in 1999, it must have felt, for a moment, like the picture was complete. It wasn't enough. In 2003, the Crown Prosecution Service reviewed the file Kent police had built, and delivered a verdict of its own. No realistic prospect of conviction. No body. No confession. No witness to a crime, only to a marriage under strain and a story that didn't add up. Andrew Griggs walked away a free man, a widower in every practical sense who had never been convicted of anything. This is the part of the case people still argue about today. Was this simply a file with a genuine hole in it, no forensic link beyond a bloodstain, no remains, nothing a court could hang a conviction on? Or was it something else, an era of policing and prosecution that hadn't yet learned to recognize what control, jealousy, and a husband's financial maneuvering actually look like when they add up to murder? Investigators who worked domestic cases in the late 1990s have since admitted, in other cases like this one, that the warning signs were there and the training to read them wasn't. Whatever the reason, the file went into a drawer, and Andrew Griggs went on with his life. In 2001, he did something that on its surface looked unremarkable. He packed up his 3 sons and moved out of Kent entirely to a house in St. Leonard's, Dorset, nearly 200 miles from Cross Road. A fresh start, he might have called it. A man rebuilding after tragedy, raising 3 boys alone in a new county where no one knew the whispers that had followed him in Deal. But a move like that is never just furniture and boxes. Whatever else made that journey with Andrew Griggs to Dorset in 2001, it would stay hidden for 21 years, buried in a place investigators in Kent had no reason to ever look. For over a decade, the case sat cold. Debbie's sons grew up largely without her, believing, in part because their father told them to, that somewhere she might still be alive. Then, in 2015, someone finally looked. Someone in Debbie's family, reading a local newspaper article that listed Kent's unsolved cases, noticed her name wasn't among them. They complained, and that complaint is the reason this case ever came back to life. Kent police pulled the file out of storage, revisiting evidence that had sat untouched since the last millennium, combined with forensic advances in the years since, would finally take this investigation somewhere the original inquiry never could. In 2019, 20 years after Debbie Griggs disappeared, Kent police finally walked their case into Canterbury Crown Court. And what made this trial extraordinary wasn't just the evidence. It was what the evidence didn't include. There was no body. There never had been. Prosecutor Duncan Atkinson KC was asking a jury to convict a man of murder using nothing but the pieces that had been sitting in a file since 1999, pieces that, on their own, had once been ruled not enough. Laid out together, though, they told a different story than they had 2 decades earlier. The joint account emptied into his name alone, days before she vanished. The affair with a 15-year-old girl, and everything he stood to lose if Debbie went through with a divorce. The blood in the abandoned Peugeot. And underneath all of it, the 24 hours he waited before picking up the phone to report his pregnant wife missing. That delay, the prosecution argued, was never about grief or confusion. It was time. Time to do whatever needed to be done before anyone else started looking, time no innocent husband would have needed, and time no innocent husband would have taken. The jury agreed. In October 2019, Andrew Griggs was found guilty of murdering his wife. Mr. Justice Spencer sentenced him to life in prison, with a minimum term of 20 years, and delivered a line that would follow Griggs for the rest of his life: "You have shown no remorse whatsoever." True remorse would have been shown only by a guilty plea and by disclosure of where you concealed the body. It was, in its own way, an admission of what the verdict could and couldn't do. A jury had decided, beyond reasonable doubt, that Andrew Griggs killed his wife. But even the judge sentencing him had to say it out loud. Nobody in that courtroom knew where Debbie actually was. The absence of a witness was never a mystery. There could never have been one, because whatever happened to her after that car was abandoned happened somewhere only Andrew Griggs controlled. And he had made certain no one else would ever see it. He appealed. In July 2022, that appeal failed. The conviction stood. By every legal measure available, the case of Debbie Griggs was closed, a rare conviction secured without a body, built entirely on the weight of circumstance and the silence of a husband who had never once told the truth about what he'd done. The law had its verdict. Debbie's family still didn't have her, and for 20 years that had been enough for Andrew Griggs. But closed in a courtroom is not the same as finished, because somewhere Debbie Griggs still hadn't been found. And the one man who knew exactly where she was had, it would turn out, already tried once before to use that silence for something else entirely. There's no childhood file on Andrew Griggs, no early warning anyone has ever put on record. What exists instead is a pattern of adult behavior, repeated at nearly every turning point in this case, and only visible, in full, from where we're standing now. Look at what he actually did. In order. He moved money quietly, before anyone had reason to watch him. He built a story calm enough to survive a police interview the day after his wife vanished. He raised 3 sons for over a decade inside that story without once breaking. He relocated 200 miles, and whatever he was hiding traveled with him. And according to the judge who sentenced him, he showed no remorse at any point along the way. Psychologists draw a line between 2 kinds of violence. Reactive violence is rage sudden, uncontrolled, over almost as fast as it starts. Instrumental violence is different. It's calculated, goal-directed. Violence used the way a tool is used, to protect something the person values more than the life in front of them: status, money, control. Nearly everything Andrew Griggs did before and after the 5th of May 1999 fits the second category far better than the first, and this is where people still argue. Did the calculation start before he killed her, meaning this was planned from the moment he moved that bank account? Or did something happen in panic, in a single uncontrolled moment, and everything afterward the story? The 23 years of silence was simply the cleanup? We may never know which came first, the plan or the improvisation. What we do know is that from that morning onward, every single choice he made was calculated, which reframes the entire case. Whatever happened in that house on the 5th of May, Debbie Griggs was never, to her husband, a wife to grieve. She was a problem to be managed quietly, patiently, for as long as it took. And here is the detail almost no one outside this case knows. He didn't even wait to see whether his conviction would survive an appeal. In November 2019, weeks after the guilty verdict, with nearly 3 years still to go before that appeal would fail, Andrew Griggs was still managing her. During a family visit to prison, he told his son Jake exactly where Debbie's remains were buried. He asked Jake to dig her up, remove a piece of her hair, carry it out of the country, and mail it back to Britain with a forged letter written as if Debbie herself had sent it, proof, he hoped, that she was alive somewhere and that he'd been telling the truth all along. The son who loved her most was the one he tried to use to bury her a second time. On the 5th of October 2022, officers acted on a tip-off and dug into the garden of the Dorset house Andrew Griggs had built his second life around. Beneath the concrete base of an old shed, they found a barrel-shaped container wrapped in tarpaulin. Inside were Debbie's remains and those of the unborn son she'd been 5 months from meeting. In June 2025, Griggs pleaded guilty to perverting the course of justice for the letter plot involving his own son. He was sentenced to 3 more years on top of the 20 already given. His earliest possible release is now 2041. The 3 boys who once ran a Facebook page called Find Our Mum, insisting their mother might still be alive, have spent their adult lives learning, piece by piece, what really happened to her, and exactly how much of it their father let them believe. Her exact cause of death, a 2025 inquest found, may never be formally known. The decades her body spent hidden saw to that too. The case is officially closed, but one question about it has never really been settled. Andrew Griggs spent over 2 decades lying to the sons he raised, and even after conviction, tried to use one of them again. So what, if anything, does a father like that still deserve from the family he never stopped deceiving? If this story moved you, give it a like, share it to raise awareness, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to follow more real-life true crime cases.